Gone, black girl.
You go, beautiful lady.
Imposter syndrome. Where do I even begin? Did it start in the 3rd grade when Brandon yelled, "You ugly," in front of all of my childhood peers? Or maybe when I was 23 years old and my corporate boss looked me in my 4 eyes and told me that my $25,000 HBCU education was worthless? Or better yet, what about 6 months leading up to the end of my marriage, when I recognized and was told that I could never be good enough for the man that I loved? I wish I could say my imposter syndrome started in those places, but I want to take it back. You see, my mother and father, they loved for me, they cared for me, they protected me. I had a good childhood. But one of the things that my parents did not teach me was how the world would treat me.
Ooh.
You know, we hear that term, imposter syndrome, and I know it's a relatively new term that some people may have never heard before. I put it up here because if you've never heard of it, it is something that impacts people, specifically women. And for myself, I've always felt like I was an imposter. According to the American Psychological Society, over 80% of people feel like, and I can attest to that, I felt like I was in one of those categories. You see, growing up, there were so many instances where I always felt like I wasn't good enough. I always felt like I always had to be catching up. And so as a result, I try to have a winner's mindset, right? I always try to be a winner, which was I always had to be good at everything. I always had to try to be the best because I associated my self-worth with doing. Whatever I could do, whatever I could show, whatever I could prove that I was able to do, ultimately equated to my self-worth. And then I quickly realized that that wasn't true. It's not about what you do, it's about who you are, but you have to get past all of the different perceptions and things that people expect of you. When people have expectations of you, it's very hard to see who you are. It's hard to separate the noise. And that's one of the things that I had to learn how to do for myself. Going back to my first example, I remember being 8 years old and meeting Brandon. Brandon was the neighborhood bully. He terrorized everyone, and I just remember walking home from Cassidy Elementary School every single day with my little book bag trying to run home. And ultimately, I saw him. He would always pick another kids, but he had never made his way to me. And then when he finally made his way to me, and when he said those words, I had realized that I had never heard that ever before. I had never heard it from my siblings. I never heard it from my family. But what he did to me was just more than just child's play, more than just a kid teasing you. Brandon pierced my confidence. He made me think about, was I truly beautiful? What does that even look like? How can you be beautiful? What is that beauty? How does it exist? And because of that, it had me start to question myself. One of the things I remember learning early on in college, there is a psychological term called tabula rasa, which means clean slate. So when we're all born with a clean slate, meaning that there's nothing that we don't think that we can do, right? Y'all know about the little babies when they're on the floor, we tell them not to touch the stove, they have that boldness, they're fearless, they're bold. But ultimately, when they touch that stove, guess what happens? They know better, right? So think about life in that respect. When I look at my life, I look at the different experiences and how they impact the way that I see myself. I saw myself with a clean slate, and up until that moment with Brandon, I thought nothing of it. I was an 8-year-old girl, I played with my Barbies, I went to school, I had fun, but then I started to think about things a little bit differently. And so it always shaped my perception of making sure that I fit the mold. And I'm a millennial. I come from that early 2000s age where we had BET Uncut, we had all the women with the nice bodies on television. That's when that Coke bottle shape, that figure, that image was put out to us as a young girl. And I remember being that girl. I used to tell people I'm on a cornbread and Jesus diet because I always wanted to be thick. I always wanted to eat food and do things to make myself look a little bit more, to have more of an appearance. And I recognized that. I would watch my peers, I would watch how people responded to the things that we were seeing inside of the media, not knowing that I was trying to transform myself to fit what someone else thought was their perception of beautiful. And I had to learn how to define and describe that for myself. But it took a long time. When I look back and I think about my childhood, I think about Brandon, but then I start to remember things, right? So again, I come from two really great parents who took care of me financially. They supported us. But I do remember growing up, and this is a conversation that I had with my dad some years ago. And I told him, Dad, you know, until I became about 20 years old, I don't think I ever remembered you calling me beautiful. I remember him always telling me about things that I needed to fix, things that I needed to work on. So again, as that winner, I'm always trying my hardest to be the best and always to do what I was told, just to make sure that I was pleasing to other people. And when we had those conversations, I recognized that I had been waiting for so much affirmations. I was waiting for confirmation from him, and I would try to seek it from different places. You know, one of the things that a lot of people don't know, and it's something that I've never really shared until this moment, the same boy who bullied me was the boy who raped me when I was 15. I never said that out loud. And in your head, you think, how do you let something like that happen? Because I remember when I was a kid, and you know, when he said those things, you know, I was ready to fight back. I was ready to say certain things, even though it hurt me. But then, by the time between the ages of 8 to 15, I asked myself, what happened? What happened to that boldness? What happened to that audacity to tell someone that you can't tell me or do certain things to me? And then I recognized that by that time, I was so consumed with how I wanted to perceive myself and how I wanted to, you know, ultimately take others' expectations of me and make it my reality when it wasn't my reality. And that moment changed me. I remember being 15, I remember sneaking out to a party, I remember being somewhere that I knew where I wasn't supposed to be, and being in that moment with him ultimately changed the way I saw myself, even more than him calling me ugly when I was 8 years old. And after that, it just kind of changed my relationship. It changed my relationship with how I saw men, and it ultimately changed my relationship with how I was seeing myself. Later on, I looked at my self-worth, and I looked at my confidence, and I realized that because I never addressed it, it spilled into other areas of your life. And that's one thing that we have to recognize. In my day-to-day work with entrepreneurs, I tell businesses that your business can't be 100% until you're 100%. Because the things that's happening in your personal life will easily spill over into your business. And there were certain things that were happening in my life that spilled into other areas of my life. Because I didn't feel confident as a person, I went into my career not feeling confident as a young career woman. That story that I mentioned earlier about my boss when I was 23 years old, that was a very much so an eye-opener for me. I've always been taught that as a Black woman, I've had to work twice as hard and be twice as good as anyone else. And when someone told me that those 4 years that I spent at Wilberforce University, my alma mater, those 4 years didn't mean anything, it really changed me into another direction. Because I saw that and I thought, well, if my white male boss thinks that, then I wonder what other people think. So I have to go to another school. I have to get more education, and I have to put myself in a position so people can see that I am good enough and I am as smart as I think I am. And so because of that, I actually went to a predominantly white institution. I went to Franklin University in Columbus, but I felt like I had to because I felt like people needed to know that I could equally be as good, because apparently what I had did was not enough. But also during that time, it was something that was empowering for me. That moment made me realize that, hey, this is not where I want to be. Do I really want to play this game that we call corporate America? Is it something that I really want to be entrenched in? Do I have the skin that's thick enough for everything that comes with it? And so shortly after that, I had decided to become an entrepreneur. I had decided to become an entrepreneur and to ultimately create my own thing. And obviously that took a lot of confidence. It's one of the most scariest things in the world, in my opinion. And at the same time as becoming an entrepreneur, I was also married. So I was a newly married person. I was 23 years old and I had gotten married. And I was trying to learn how to balance being a wife and also balance having a new business at the same time. And needless to say, it was very much so a balancing act that it was very hard for me to keep up. Very, very hard. I married very young, not realizing that when you enter a union with someone, it's really important that you get to know yourself. because it's really good to do some of that work before you get with someone, because as a young people, we were learning ourselves at the same time. And so there were a lot of things that happened in my marriage that kind of rocked my confidence because we got married so young. We had infidelity. There were a lot of instances where I was questioning myself because I didn't feel like I was enough for my husband. Then within our marriage, ultimately, I was the ambitious person, right? There's always some sort of balance. So, the person I was with, I loved him to death. And as I went to chase my ambition, it created a gap in our marriage, right? Yeah. It almost felt like I love my career and I love chasing that success more than I love to be with him in his perception. But in my head, I was building, I'm doing something, I'm trying to get somewhere, I'm trying to make this work. But ultimately, it led to the demise of our marriage. And I remember that day when he told me that he never thought that he could truly be with one woman because one woman would never be enough for him. And then in my head, I said, wow, well, if I can never be enough for him, maybe I would never be enough for anybody. So that one opinion changed the way that I thought about how my relationships would look forward beyond that marriage. But ultimately, I realized that I can't allow other people's perceptions to dictate how I see myself, how I treat myself, how I feel about myself. I had to learn how to separate what others thought of me and their opinions from who I actually was, because that ultimately clouded my judgment and how I was able to operate as an individual. So one of the things that I want to share with you all, as we go back to our definition of imposter syndrome. So it's the inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has been legitimately achieved as a result of one's own efforts. And this was very true for me. The more I tried to prove myself, the more I felt like I still wasn't enough. But one of the things that really stood out to me and that really captivated me is a book that I read, and I would recommend this book to anyone. It's called I'm Not Yelling by Liz Leva. And she said something that was so transformative to me, it changed my life. She said, imposter syndrome was a lie. And I agreed to some respect. But then what she said transformed me, and she said this. After putting my experience in context, I decided to stop referring to myself as having imposter syndrome. The truth of the matter is, what I didn't feel like was an imposter. I had been treated like one. I had internalized the message that I was a fraud when I was actually Black girl magic personified. So think about that. Think about a moment in your life where maybe you personally knew that you could do something, but someone told you that you couldn't. So it changed the trajectory of how you thought about that particular thing. Yeah. And I think that's what happens to a lot of us. We're not imposters. We weren't born thinking that we weren't great, because we were born from greatness, right? We were born knowing that we are enough. And anything that God creates is not by any accident. So we all have the ability if we have the vision that comes into our mind. But in reality, what ends up happening is that people decide to treat us as if we cannot. When I looked up imposter syndrome and the roots of how that term came to be, is actually a term that was coined in the 1970s. So 2 psychologists did a study on women in the 70s, and they talked about how these women didn't feel like they were enough. But interestingly enough, they didn't look at all of the different factors that affect us today. Racism, classism, xenophobia. There's so many phobias, right? There's so many things that affect who we are as people. And those biases that others project on us can ultimately change how we look at ourselves. And so now that I understand that, I recognize that imposter treatment is what I had suffered from. When I was young, never had any negative thoughts about myself. But then when I started to go through the motions and to go through the ebbs and flows of life and to have those different experiences, it altered how I felt. So when I look at this, there's a couple of things that I want to share, just what I've learned from my journey. So one of the most important things is understanding the roots of your self-doubt. So what are the roots of my self-doubt? So again, I recognize that some of it came from my upbringing, some things that I got from my parents. some of the external experiences that I had from others. But ultimately, you have to understand where your self-doubt stems from. A lot of times we are scared to do things, but we haven't thought about why we're actually fearful of it, right? Sometimes we're fearful of things because we've never done it before. Sometimes we're fearful because we've never seen anyone else do it before. And sometimes we're fearful just because someone told us that we couldn't do it. And ultimately, we have to think about what is it that truly puts us in that bind of not feeling like you can go forward. I know the roots of my self-doubt. It's something that I think about often. You know, one of the things that I learned, especially learning in therapy in 2020. So when I was getting divorced, a little known fact, when I was getting divorced, many people don't know that I was a pre-alcoholic. I call it a pre-alcoholic because I decided to stop it before it got out of control. At the time when I separated, I was drinking every single day. I didn't know what to do. I was still trying to function. I was still trying to be that entrepreneur. My business was actually growing, and it was crazy because my business was growing and my life was falling apart at the same time. And knowing what I know about my family history, I said, this isn't it. This ain't it for me, sis. you have to do something different. You can't be what you've been able to see for most of your life. And so I put myself in therapy. I decided to go to therapy and to work through some of the things. And a lot of the work that we did, it dealt with the divorce, but a lot of it was work that we dealt with was understanding who I was and why I felt the way that I felt about certain things, why I was scared to take certain risks, or why I didn't think that I was good enough in certain moments. So it's really important to understand what are the roots of the self-doubt? Where do they come from? Why does it impact you? And then how do you overturn those things? How do you make sure that that self-doubt doesn't stop you from moving forward in the way that you need to? One thing that I learned, and I'll say it again, but confidence is a journey. And that's something that I've learned over time. When we say, oh, I'm confident, confidence is something that can come today and it can leave tomorrow just as easily as it is with an experience of someone saying that you're ugly, right? So it's really important to look at confidence as a journey and not a destination. It's something that you have to work through. It's a process. And you have to put yourself in positions to where you build your confidence. And building confidence is doing things that you've never done before. It's going outside of your comfort zone and knowing that, you know, just because you thought that you weren't able to do something in the beginning doesn't mean that you can't do those things. Because once you do it, you prove to yourself that you can. And so for me, it's really important to recognize that confidence is truly a journey. And you have to understand that some of those things that happen to you, those experiences, they may be triggering, but you have to understand how do you actually get over those things? How do you actually overcome them? And a part of that is again, just going outside of what it is that you know so you can ultimately get to where you want to go. The other piece of this is understanding the role that biases play and how people underestimate you. And the key is the word underestimate, right? So when we think about imposter treatment, it's truly people who are underestimating you. They may say that you can't do it because you're a woman. They may say that you can't do it because you're a black woman. You know, there's so many reasons and factors of how someone can underestimate you based on their limited perceptions or limited experiences with people who are like you. And so one of the things that has been pivotal in helping me build my confidence is understanding that there are biases that are around. There are biases that may impact how someone else may treat me, but that doesn't mean that I have to ultimately treat myself in a specific way. Ultimately, you want to understand when someone's saying something to you, where is it coming from, right? Is it coming from a place of helping you, or is it coming from a place of hurting you? The intention behind how someone approaches you and how they treat you is something that's very critical. So I've always tried to understand how biases affect how others treat me. And in the same point, if you flip it, understand how your biases impact how you treat other people. It's as important to recognize how you treat others as well as how other people are treating you. And as I mentioned before, recognizing that building confidence is truly an infinite journey. One thing I always tell people, the biggest wins are not the ones that are external. The biggest wins are the wins that we have right here, or the wins that nobody sees, the wins that nobody hears about. It's really important to understand growth. And I say growth because growth is a big part of building confidence. I once read a book, and it talked about how when we grow, we assume that we mentally grow as we age, right? You know, we get older, our bodies get more mature, so we assume automatically that our brains mature at the same time as our bodies, and they just don't. You know, that's the irony of things. You don't mentally grow as you grow as a person, and you have to always choose to seek growth. In this season of my life, I think growth is something that is so important, because without growth, it's hard to unlock the next level. You know, we hear a lot of this in the mainstream media today when people talk about, I'm in my such and such era, I'm in my sophomore era, or I'm in this season or that season. It is important to recognize what season of your life you're in. Understanding your season, I think, will help you ultimately build some confidence. I went through a space where I had to pause for a season, right? I had a season of pause. And because I paused, I thought that, well, I'm not constantly working, I'm not in my work mode, so I'm worthless because I'm not doing all the things that I'm used to doing, not recognizing that sometimes God causes us to pause so we're able to pivot, so we're able to do something differently. And ultimately, I believe that you should definitely think about those seasons and understand why those seasons are critical in your life and how to leverage them so you can unlock the next level of yourself. When I think about imposter syndrome, the thing that I want you all to think about and to take away from imposter syndrome is that you want to make sure that you're looking back, you're looking at yourself, you're looking at what matters to you the most. I think sometimes we get caught up in what everyone else wants that we forget our own personal why, our own personal purpose, our own personal mission. And I promise you, when you lock into your own personal purpose and mission, all those other things get drowned out. They all ultimately become noise. And you have to understand that how do you set measures for success for yourself? In business, we talk to people about KPIs, key performance metrics. So as a person, you have to set those metrics for yourself. When someone says that they're a success, what does success look like to you? How do you measure that success by your own accord? By measuring your own success and looking at your own standards, you'll feel a lot more confident because you've set that bar for yourself. It's important to not allow others to set the bar for you, because then you'll always feel like you're chasing something. Don't chase things, understand what it means for you and figure out how do you set the bar there. One of the things mentioned today was my bio. In my bio, she had mentioned I was an author. I'm the author of a children's book called Hey Black Girl. And I wanted to mention that because when I wrote that book, that was me realigning and resetting myself. I remember writing that book at 7 o'clock in the morning at a hotel in Las Vegas. I was at a conference. It was an author's conference. And those words came to me and it stuck with me. And Hey Black Girl became my anthem. It became the words that I wish that I had heard when I was younger. It became those affirmations for me. And when I wrote those words, it truly started to make me think about how I needed to change everything that I had been doing. You know, what works may get you there, but where you're going, you may have to switch up and change, right? And so I wrote the words of the book, and I wanted to share them with you because this is the mantra that I truly embody. Hey Black girl, no matter who you are, whether big or small, you are more than enough and can have it all. The world may say, you're too this or you're too that. Put those cakes away, you're too big to have a snack. Give it to her, she needs meat on her bones. Put some clothes on, girl, your body is too grown. Add some heat to your hair, it's way too kinky. Make it long and straight, and then you'll be pretty. Shh, be quiet, you're way too loud. Stay in the box and put you in and don't make a sound. Hey Black girl, wanna change that chocolate skin? Ready to change everything on the outside so you forget who you are within? Forget those dreams of becoming something, because the way the world is set up, your life means nothing. Hey Black girl, did I say too much? I thought you were built to steal superwoman and can't be touched. Hey world, shush. Shh, I am more than enough. My body is fine the way that it is, whether I'm big, skinny, or thick. I don't look to you to be beautiful because my confidence is a bliss. I love every kink, coil, or curl in my hair. I wear it like a crown because my style is rare. I would never be quiet because what I say matters. I will be seen and heard, nonetheless, or the latter. Hey world, my skin is so rich, it makes me feel wealthy. I would never change a thing about myself. I was born to be the best me. My dreams are on a pavement, a black girl emotion. My life matters, no matter your emotions. Hey black girls, no matter who you are, whether big or small, you are more than enough and can absolutely have it all.
Yes, I can.
So that is my mantra to myself. Those are the words that I try to repeat to myself every single day because those are the words that I felt like I needed to hear. Those are the words that even as an adult you still need to hear, even though it's something I created for young girls. But it's important. What you say to yourself, how you speak to yourself, how you treat yourself, that is very important to who you are as a person. We place a lot of blame on others, but the level of accountability that I take for myself is making sure that I'm being kind to myself. And I think sometimes it's very easy for us not to be kind to ourselves based on how we've been treated. So, I say all that to say, when you look at yourself and when you look at things that you do, always recognize that your good is good enough. Don't let anybody tell you that your good is never good enough. And that's something that I've worked on. That's something that I still work on today. Because again, confidence is a journey, and things may always shatter you. The newest level that I'm learning in my life right now is even just through the work that I do. Through the work that I'm doing with the Greater West Dayton Incubator. It's a very public-facing job, right? So something that's very public. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone wants to tell you what to do or how you should be. And sometimes it's scary. Feedback is very scary, especially when you know that you have good intentions and you want to create something that is sustainable for all. But nevertheless, you always have to persist. One of the things that I'm learning is that I always know what my effort is. I always have to remember that my good is good enough, and that has to be good enough for me. So I say that to you all to just remember that when we think about imposter syndrome, when we think about how others treat us, you want to remember and always remember that it's not about what people call you, but it's ultimately what you answer to. Thanks.